to another edition of the Optimized Weekly Market Recap. I'm David Ferreira, and as always for today's recap, we'll take a look at last week's activity in the markets, as well as what we're watching for in the week ahead. It was a busy week in the markets with some major data releases, including important inflation data for the US and the Bank of Canada's interest rate announcement, with more to come this week. Looking at last week's market performance, the Nasdaq was the best performing North American equity index, down only 45 basis points on the week as megatech continued to prove its resilience. The TSX and the S&P 500 were both down about 1.5% on the week, with the Dow Jones down a little over 2%. And taking a look at sector performance, technology and consumer discretionary companies were the strongest performers, while materials and financials were the weakest. Looking at the events from this past week, the Bank of Canada held its monetary policy meeting, holding its policy rate at 5%, in line with expectations. Comments from Governor Macklem hinted at a rate cut in June is a possibility and still very much on the table. In the US, we saw slightly hotter than expected inflation data, as headline inflation for March came in at 3.5%, 0.4% above expectations, driven higher mostly by fuel costs. Core inflation remained unchanged, however, from the prior month, which was a welcome relief. Later in the week, we got an update on producers' prices, which painted a more optimistic picture. The PPI rose 0.2% for the month of March, lower than expected, sitting at 2.1% year over year, and markets welcomed this news on Thursday as a sign of cooling future inflation. Now, for the week ahead, the publication of the March CPI data for Canada is on the docket this week, and as was the case for the US last week, the energy component is likely to have had a positive impact on the headline figure, given the rise in gas prices during the month. We'll also get a housing update for the US, as well as more inflation data coming from a handful of G7 countries. And on the corporate earnings front, some big releases this week. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Procter & Gamble are on deck to report. Certainly no shortage of excitement in the markets last week, with more to come in the week ahead. As always, thank you for watching, and see you soon.